Imagine yourself standing on a rugged Nordic shore, the salty wind whipping through your hair as long ships cut through the misty waves, like dragons awakening from slumber. The year is 793 AD, and the Viking Age is dawning, a time when fierce warriors from Scandinavia would sail forth to raid, trade, and explore, leaving an indelible mark on the world. These Norsemen, often portrayed as barbaric raiders, were also master shipbuilders, navigators, and settlers who ventured from the fjords of Norway to the rivers of Russia, from the coasts of England to the shores of North America. Their era, spanning from the late 8th to the 11th century, was one of unparalleled expansion, cultural fusion, and eventual transformation. But how did a scattered group of farmers and fishermen become the terror of Europe? What drove their legendary raids, and what forces led to their mysterious decline? Tonight, we embark on a journey through the rise and fall of the Viking Age, a tale of blood and bravery, gods and gold that will transport you to a world of myth and reality. As the longships set sail, let the rhythm of the oars and the call of the sea lull you into this epic saga, where every wave holds a secret waiting to be revealed. The dawn of the Viking Age. Imagine yourself standing on the rugged coast of Scandinavia, where the cold wind whips across fjords that carve deep into the land like the claws of some ancient beast. The year is around 793 AD, but to understand the dawn of the Viking Age, we must go back further, to a time when the people of this northern world lived in harmony with a harsh and unforgiving nature. The Scandinavians, Norwegians, Danes, and Swedes were a hardy folk, descendants of tribes that had migrated from the east and south centuries earlier. They dwelled in longhouses made of timber and turf, clustered in small villages surrounded by fields of barley and rye. Their days were spent tending to livestock, fishing the bountiful seas, and trading furs and amber with distant neighbors. But this was no idyllic existence. The land was stingy, its soil thin and rocky, yielding just enough to sustain life, but not to foster growth. Winters were long and brutal, with darkness enveloping the world for months, and summers short, demanding every ounce of labor to harvest the crops. Population pressures began to build as families grew larger, and the available arable land could no longer support them all. Young men, full of vigor and ambition, looked beyond their shores for opportunities. What drove these people to venture forth? Was it mere desperation, or something deeper, a call from their gods, a thirst for adventure etched into their very souls? The Scandinavians were a seafaring people, their longships masterpieces of craftsmanship. These vessels, with their shallow drafts and flexible hulls, could navigate rivers, across open seas, and beach on sandy shores. Built from oak and pine, clinker planked for strength and speed, they were propelled by oars and sails, capable of carrying warriors, cargo, and dreams of glory. The Vikings, as they would come to be known, were not born raiders. They were farmers, traders, and craftsmen first. But as resources dwindled and climate shifts made farming harder, historians note a cooling period that shortened growing seasons. The sea beckoned as a path to survival and wealth. Religion played a pivotal role in this transformation. The Norse pantheon was a pantheon of warriors and tricksters. Odin, the All-Father, who sacrificed an eye for wisdom, Thor, the thunder god with his mighty hammer Mjolnir, and Freya, the goddess of love and war. These gods demanded boldness, rewarding those who dared to seize their fate. Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain, awaited brave warriors who died in battle, a paradise of feasting and fighting. This belief system encouraged risk taking, turning potential desperation into divine destiny. But what sparked the first raids? Was it a single event or a gradual shift driven by necessity? The Viking Age is traditionally dated from 793 AD, with the raid on Lindisfarne Monastery in Northumbria, England. But the roots go deeper. Archaeological evidence shows Scandinavian trade with Europe dating back to the Roman era, but by the 8th century, something changed. Overpopulation, land scarcity, and perhaps political consolidation under strong chieftains created a surplus of young men eager for wealth and status. The seas offered riches. Monasteries and coastal towns in Britain and Ireland were wealthy and poorly defended, their treasures ripe for the taking. The raid on Lindisfarne was brutal and shocking. Viking longships beached on the Holy Island, warriors storming the monastery, slaughtering monks, and looting gold, silver, and slaves. The Anglo Saxon Chronicle lamented, "The ravages of heathen men miserably destroyed God's church on Lindisfarne." This act of violence announced the Vikings to Europe, but it was not random cruelty. It was calculated. The Vikings targeted weak points, striking fast and retreating before retaliation. As the raids intensified, the Vikings evolved from hit and run pirates to settlers. In 865 AD, the great heathen army landed in England, conquering vast territories and establishing the Danelaw. In France, they settled Normandy, their descendants becoming the Normans, who would conquer England in 1066. In the east, they ventured down Russian rivers, founding Kievan Rus and trading with Byzantium. But what fueled this expansion? Was it the thrill of battle, the promise of land, or a deeper cultural imperative? The Vikings were not just raiders, they were explorers, traders, and farmers. Their longships, with shallow drafts, allowed river navigation, opening trade routes from the Baltic to the Black Sea. They traded furs, amber, and slaves for silver, silk, and spices. In Iceland and Greenland, they established colonies, pushing the boundaries of the known world. Leif Erikson reached North America around 1000 AD, 500 years before Columbus, naming it Vinland for its wild grapes. But why did they venture so far? What drove these Norsemen to risk everything on the open sea? Viking society was hierarchical but meritocratic. Chieftains, or jarls, led clans, but any man could rise through bravery and wealth. Women held significant power, managing households and even fighting as shield maidens. Their religion, with gods like Odin and Thor, emphasized fate and honor. Runes, their writing system, were used for inscriptions and magic. But as Christianity spread, the old ways faded, marking the end of the Viking Age. The Vikings' impact was profound. They shaped Europe's map, their blood flowing in English, Irish, and Russian veins. Their sagas, like the Eddas, preserve myths that inspire today. But their brutality cannot be ignored. Raids left villages in ashes, monasteries plundered. Yet they also brought trade, technology, and genes that enriched societies. The Viking Age ended with the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066, where Harold Hardrada fell, and William the Conqueror, a Viking descendant, took England. But their spirit lives on, a legacy of exploration and resilience. As we reflect on this era, we are left with wonder at the forces that propelled these seafaring warriors. The Viking Age invites us to ponder the human drive for adventure and the mysteries that lie beyond the horizon. The Viking Age is a testament to the power of the human spirit, a story that reminds us that even in the darkest times, the light of curiosity and courage can guide us forward. The first raids. The Viking Age truly ignites with a thunderclap of violence on a misty morning in 793 AD, when three longships slice through the waves toward the holy island of Lindisfarne off the coast of Northumbria in England. This isolated monastery, perched on a rocky outcrop, was a sanctuary of learning and faith, its monks devoted to prayer and the illumination of sacred manuscripts. The island's inhabitants had no inkling that doom was approaching from the sea, carried on the wings of a storm. As the ships beached on the shore, the Vikings, fierce warriors from Norway, leapt ashore with axes and swords gleaming in the dim light. They were not mere pirates, they were raiders driven by a potent mix of necessity and opportunity. The monastery, rich with silver chalices, golden crosses, and jeweled reliquaries, was an irresistible target. The monks, caught in their morning prayers, could only watch in horror as the invaders stormed the church, slaughtering those who resisted and seizing the treasures that had been accumulated over generations. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a contemporary account, describes the raid with chilling brevity. In this year, fierce, foreboding omens came over the land of the Northumbrians. Here came dire portents over the land of the Northumbrians, and miserably terrified the people. These were immense flashes of lightning, and fiery dragons were seen flying in the air. The Vikings, often called heathen men by their victims, left the monastery in ruins, its altars desecrated and its survivors traumatized. They loaded their ships with loot and captives, monks to be sold as slaves, and sailed away, leaving behind a trail of smoke and blood. This raid on Lindisfarne is often marked as the official start of the Viking Age. But why did it happen then? The Vikings had been exploring and trading for centuries, but a combination of factors, overpopulation in Scandinavia, advances in shipbuilding, and the wealth of undefended monasteries, converged to unleash this wave of raids. The longships, with their shallow drafts and flexible hulls, allowed them to navigate rivers and beach on shores, striking deep inland where no one expected danger. From Lindisfarne, the Vikings' raids spread like wildfire. In 794, they attacked the monastery at Jarrow, and by 795, they reached Ireland, sacking the holy island of Iona. These early raids were hit-and-run affairs, targeting coastal monasteries for their wealth and lack of defense. The Vikings' speed and ferocity terrorized Europe, earning them a reputation as demons from the north. But were they mere barbarians, or was there method to their madness? As the raids intensified, the Vikings began to overwinter in their targets, establishing bases like the one on the Isle of Man. This shift from raiding to settlement marked a new phase. In 865, the Great Heathen Army, led by the legendary brothers Ivar the Boneless, Ubbe, and Halfdan, invaded England. They conquered Northumbria, East Anglia, and Mercia, establishing the Danelaw, a region under Viking control where Norse laws and customs held sway. The Vikings' impact was profound. They introduced new words to the English language: sky, window, knife, and their blood flows in the veins of many Britons today. But the raids also brought terror. Chronicles describe villages burned, women and children enslaved, and holy sites desecrated. The Vikings worshipped Odin, Thor, and Freya, gods who valued bravery in battle and rewarded warriors with Valhalla. This warrior ethos drove their conquests, but it also sowed the seeds of their eventual assimilation. As the Vikings expanded, they encountered resistance. In England saw King Alfred the Great of Wessex rallied his people, defeating the great army at Edington in 878. The Treaty of Wedmore divided England, but Alfred's reforms, fortified burhs, a standing navy, laid the groundwork for a unified kingdom. In France, the Vikings besieged Paris in 885, but the city's defenses held. They settled in Normandy, becoming the Normans who would conquer England in 1066. But the Vikings were not just destroyers, they were traders and explorers. Their longships carried them to Constantinople, where they served as Varangian guards for the Byzantine emperors. They ventured to Iceland, Greenland, and even North America, where Leif Erikson established Vinland around 1000 AD. These voyages expanded the known world, but they also stretched the Vikings thin. As Christianity spread, the old gods faded. Harold Bluetooth, who converted Denmark in the 960s, and Olaf Tryggvason brought Christianity to Norway. This shift marked the end of the Viking Age. As the raiders became settlers, their longships traded for plows. The Viking Age's legacy is immense. They shaped Europe's map, their descendants ruling England, Normandy, and Sicily. Their sagas preserve myths that inspire today. But mysteries remain. What drove their sudden raids? How did they navigate the open seas? And what lost knowledge did they carry from distant lands? The Viking Age invites us to reflect on the human drive for exploration and the fine line between hero and villain. The Viking Age is a testament to the power of the human spirit, a story that reminds us that even in the darkest times, the light of curiosity and courage can guide us forward. Viking ships, masters of the seas. As the Viking Age gained momentum, the true secret to their success lay not just in their fierce spirit or strategic cunning, but in the vessels that carried them across treacherous waters, the legendary longships. These were no ordinary boats. They were masterpieces of craftsmanship, designed with a blend of ingenuity and practicality that allowed the Vikings to become masters of the seas. The longship's construction was a communal effort, passed down through generations, with techniques refined over centuries to create vessels that were fast, flexible, and fearsome. The shipyards of Scandinavia were alive with activity, where skilled artisans, known as shipwrights, gathered around massive oak trees, selecting the straightest trunks for keels and the most flexible branches for ribs. Oak was the wood of choice for its strength and durability, able to withstand the pounding waves of the North Atlantic. And the process began with the keel, the backbone of the ship, a single long beam that provided stability and served as the foundation for the entire structure. From this central piece, the shipwrights attached curved ribs, shaping the hull with an eye for symmetry and balance. The hull was built using the clinker method, where overlapping planks were riveted together, creating a flexible shell that could twist and bend with the waves rather than fight against them. And this design was crucial for navigating the rough seas and shallow rivers that the Vikings encountered on their voyages. The planks were caulked with animal hair or wool soaked in tar to make them watertight, ensuring the ship could endure long journeys without leaking. The prow and stern were raised high, often carved with intricate dragon heads or serpents, not just for aesthetic purposes, but to intimidate enemies and ward off evil spirits believed to dwell in the water. What truly set the longship apart was its versatility. Measuring between 45 to 75 feet in length, with a beam of about 16 feet, it could carry up to 60 warriors, along with provisions, weapons, and loot. The shallow draft, less than 3 feet, allowed it to navigate rivers and beach on sandy shores, enabling surprise attacks deep inland. When the wind was favorable, a large square sail made of wool or linen, often striped in red and white, propelled the ship at speeds up to 15 knots. In calm waters or against the wind, rows of oars, up to 30 on each side, provided propulsion, with each oar manned by a strong Viking rower. The longship's design was a product of evolution, refined through trial and error. Early Viking boats were smaller, used for fishing and local trade, but as the need for longer voyages grew, so did the ships. The Gokstad ship, discovered in Norway in 1880, is a prime example, a 78-foot vessel buried with a chieftain in 895 AD, complete with oars, sail, and shields along the sides. Its construction reveals the Vikings' deep understanding of hydrodynamics. The curved hull reduced drag, while the flexible structure absorbed the impact of waves, preventing breakage. This technological superiority gave the Vikings an edge over their contemporaries. European ships of the time were clunky and slow, designed for coastal hugging, but the longship could cross open oceans, endure storms, and strike like lightning. It was this innovation that allowed the Vikings to raid monasteries in England, sail up the Seine to besiege Paris, and explore the rivers of Russia. But how did they navigate these vast distances without compasses or maps? The Vikings relied on the sun, stars, and natural signs, birds, waves, and even the color of the water. They used sunstones, crystals that polarized light, to find the sun on cloudy days, and shadow boards as to measure latitude. These methods, passed down orally, were as crucial as the ships themselves. The longships were not just tools of war, they were extensions of Viking identity. Each ship had a name, often poetic like Wave Rider or Sea Serpent, and was considered a living entity, blessed with rituals before launch. The Vikings believed their gods, Odin for wisdom, Thor for strength, watched over their voyages, and sacrifices were made to ensure safe passage. This spiritual connection added a layer of mystique to the longships, making them symbols of divine favor. As the Vikings ventured forth, their longships carried them to unimaginable places. In 793 AD, they sacked Lindisfarne, marking the start of the Viking Age. By 865 AD, the great heathen army invaded England, their fleet a forest of masts on the horizon. In the east, they navigated the Volga and Dnieper rivers, trading with Byzantium and founding Kievan Rus. In the west, they settled Iceland in 874 AD, Greenland in 986 AD, and reached North America around 1000 AD, where Leif Erikson established Vinland. These voyages expanded the known world, but they also strained resources. Building a longship required massive oaks, scarce in Scandinavia, leading to deforestation and perhaps contributing to the age's end. The longship's legacy endures. Replicas like the Gokstad copy have sailed the Atlantic, proving their seaworthiness. They influenced ship design in Europe, from Norman vessels to medieval cogs. But mysteries remain. What navigation techniques have been lost? How did they build fleets without iron nails? And what shipwrecks lie undiscovered, holding clues to their seafaring prowess? The Viking longship, stands as a symbol of exploration and endurance, a vessel that carried not just men, but a culture across the world. It invites us to reflect on the human drive, to venture into the unknown, and to wonder what other secrets the seas hold from this age of sail and sword. Exploration and settlement. The Viking Age, that tumultuous era of exploration and conquest, saw the Norsemen push the boundaries of the known world far beyond the fjords of Scandinavia. As their longships ventured into uncharted waters, driven by a thirst for land, wealth, and adventure, they discovered new horizons that would reshape their destiny and leave an indelible mark on history. This phase of expansion was not just about raiding, it was about settlement, survival, and the relentless pursuit of a better life in lands untouched by their ancestors. What compelled these hardy seafarers to brave the icy waves and unknown perils? And what secrets did they uncover in these distant realms? As we delve into their journeys to Iceland, Greenland, and even the shores of North America, we uncover a saga of discovery that continues to intrigue and inspire. The first major leap into the unknown came in the mid 9th century when Viking explorers, often blown off course during raids on the British Isles, stumbled upon a large island to the northwest. The earliest recorded discovery is attributed to Nadod, a Norwegian Viking who, around 860 AD, was sailing from Norway to the Faroe Islands when a storm pushed him westward. Landing on this new land, he named it Snaland, Snowland, due to the heavy snowfall he encountered. Naddod's tale spread like wildfire back home, igniting curiosity among his fellow Norsemen. Who could resist the promise of untamed wilderness, free from kings and crowded farms? Not long after, in 870 AD, Gardar Svavarsson, a Swedish Viking, set out deliberately to find this snowland. He circumnavigated the island, proving it was indeed an island, and spent a winter there building a house at Husavik. Gardar's account was more detailed. He described fertile valleys, geothermal springs bubbling from the earth, and vast grasslands perfect for grazing. But he also warned of the harsh winters and isolation. Gardar named it Gardar's Holmers, Gardar's Island, but the name didn't stick. Instead, it became known as Iceland, a moniker coined by Floki Vilgerdarsson, another Norwegian explorer who followed in 874 AD. Floki's journey was fraught with hardship. He released 3 ravens to guide him, a nod to Odin's birds in Norse mythology, and the third raven led him to land. But his winter was brutal. His livestock died, and he cursed the island as full of ice. Despite his bitterness, Floki's tales of hot springs and abundant fish lured settlers. By 930 AD, Iceland was colonized, its population swelling to 60,000. The Vikings established the Althing, the world's oldest parliament, a democratic assembly where chieftains debated laws under the open sky. But what drove this mass migration? Was it the promise of freedom or the push of overpopulation back home? And how did these settlers survive in such a volatile land where volcanoes erupted and glaciers advanced? Iceland became a launchpad for further exploration. In 982 AD, Eric the Red, a fiery Norwegian exiled for manslaughter, set sail westward after hearing rumors of land sighted by Gunnbjorn Ulfsson. Eric landed on a massive island, its coasts icy, but its interior green with grass. Cunning as he was, Eric named it Greenland to attract settlers, downplaying the harshness. He returned to Iceland with tales of fertile fjords and mild climates, luring 25 ships of colonists in 986 AD. Only 14 arrived, the others lost to storms, but the settlement took root. Eric's colony at Brattahlid thrived on farming, hunting, and trade. They built stone churches, raised livestock, and hunted walrus for ivory, a valuable commodity. But Greenland's climate was unforgiving. Winters grew harsher, and the Little Ice Age in the 14th century would doom the settlements. Before that, Eric's son, Leif Erikson, pushed further. Around 1000 AD, Leif sailed west after hearing Bjarni Herjolfsson's tale of land sighted beyond Greenland. Leif landed in a place he called Helluland, flatstone land, likely Baffin Island, then Markland, forest land, perhaps Labrador, and finally Vinland, wineland, now Newfoundland, where grapes grew wild. In Vinland, Leif built Leifsbudir, a small settlement where his crew wintered. They found timber, salmon, and mild weather. But encounters with natives, called Skraelings, turned hostile. Leif returned to Greenland, but his brother Thorvald explored further, dying in a skirmish. Thorfinn Karlsefni led a larger expedition with 160 settlers, including women and livestock, establishing a base in Vinland. They traded with natives, but clashes ensued, and after 3 years, they abandoned the settlement. Why did they leave? Fear of the Skraelings, harsh winters, or homesickness for Greenland? Archaeology confirms the saga. In 1960, at Lance aux Meadows in Newfoundland, Helga Ingstad uncovered Viking ruins, longhouses, iron nails, and a spindle whorl dated to 1000 AD. It's the only confirmed Viking site in North America, proving they reached the New World 500 years before Columbus. But why didn't they stay? And what became of Vinland? The site was seasonal, perhaps a staging post for timber. Climate change, the Little Ice Age, may have made return voyages impossible, stranding any remaining settlers. The Vikings' explorations reshaped the world. They connected Europe to America, trading timber and furs. Their sagas preserve these tales, blending fact and myth. But mysteries remain. What other sites lie undiscovered? Did Vikings intermarry with natives? And how far did they really go? These questions linger, drawing us deeper into the Viking saga, a tale of bravery, discovery, and the unknown that continues to unfold. Viking society and daily life. Viking society was a vibrant tapestry of culture, hierarchy, and daily rituals that reflected their deep connection to the land, the sea, and the supernatural forces they believed governed their lives. At its core, this society was structured around three main classes: the Jarls, or nobles, who were the chieftains and landowners wielding power through wealth and warrior prowess; the Carls, the free farmers and craftsmen who formed the backbone of the community, owning their land and participating in local assemblies; and the thralls, the slaves captured in raids or born into bondage, who performed the hardest labor but could sometimes earn their freedom through loyalty or bravery. This social structure was fluid in ways that set the Vikings apart from many contemporary cultures. A thrall could rise to become a carl, and a successful raider could amass enough wealth to join the Jarls, creating a merit-based system that rewarded ambition and skill. Daily life for the Vikings revolved around the rhythms of the seasons and the demands of survival in a harsh northern climate. In the long summer days, men and women alike tended to fields of barley and rye, herded cattle and sheep, and fished the bountiful fjords for cod and herring that would sustain them through the winter. The longhouse was the center of family life, a long rectangular building made of timber and turf where multiple generations lived under one roof, sharing warmth from a central hearth that burned day and night. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of smoke, cooking stews, and drying herbs, while the walls were adorned with woven tapestries depicting heroic deeds and mythical creatures. Children learned from their elders, boys training with wooden swords to become warriors, girls mastering the loom and the hearth, all while absorbing the oral traditions that passed down knowledge from generation to generation. Culture was the soul of Viking society, a rich blend of art, storytelling, and craftsmanship that celebrated their heritage and aspirations. Vikings were master metalworkers, forging intricate jewelry from silver and gold, looted in raids, decorated with twisting animal motifs known as the gripping beast, style that symbolized power and protection. Their wood carvings adorned everything from ship prows to doorposts, depicting scenes from the sagas, epic tales of heroes like Sigurd the Dragon Slayer or the voyages of Eric the Red. These sagas, recited by skalds in the great halls during feasts, were not just entertainment, they were a way to preserve history, teach morals, and inspire the young. Music filled the air with the haunting tones of the lyre and the rhythmic beat of drums, while poetry flowed like mead, often in complex forms that praised chieftains or lamented lost loves. Society was governed by the thing, local assemblies where free men gathered to settle disputes, make laws, and elect leaders. These gatherings were democratic in spirit, with decisions made by consensus or vote, a precursor to modern parliaments that showcased the Vikings' emphasis on community and justice. Law was sacred, with codes like the Icelandic Gragas, detailing everything from marriage to manslaughter, and violations punished by fines, outlawry, or blood feuds that could span generations. Honor was paramount. A man's reputation was his most valuable possession, defended with sword if necessary. But this honor code also fostered a culture of hospitality, where strangers were welcomed with food and shelter, as the gods themselves might disguise as wanderers to test mortal kindness. Religion was the thread that wove through every aspect of Viking life, a polytheistic faith centered on the Aesir and Vanir gods who dwelled in Asgard, a realm connected to Midgard by the Rainbow Bridge Bifrost. Odin, the All-Father, was the god of wisdom, war, and poetry, who sacrificed an eye for knowledge and rode the eight-legged horse Sleipnir. Thor, the thunder god, wielded his hammer Mjolnir to protect humanity from giants, his chariot causing storms as he rode across the sky. Freya, the goddess of love, fertility, and magic, drove a chariot pulled by cats and claimed half the slain warriors for her hall, Folkvanger. The Vikings believed in 9 worlds, connected by the world tree Yggdrasil, where fate was spun by the Norns, and Ragnarok, the end of the gods, loomed as an inevitable cataclysm. Daily rituals honored these gods, offerings of food or blood at sacred groves, blots, sacrifices during festivals like Yule or Midsummer, and runes carved for divination or protection. Seers, known as vulvas, practiced satyr, a form of shamanic magic often associated with women, who traveled between worlds to foresee the future or heal the sick. This mystical side of Viking religion added a layer of wonder to their society, where the supernatural was as real as the sea. The role of women in Viking society was remarkably empowered compared to many contemporary cultures, a facet that adds depth to their social tapestry. Viking women managed households, farms, and businesses when men were away raiding or trading, holding legal rights to divorce, inherit property, and even led in some cases. They were shield maidens in legend, like Lagertha, who fought alongside men, their bravery celebrated in sagas. Archaeological finds, such as the Oseberg ship burial of two high status women, reveal their influence, buried with riches and tools of power. But this equality had limits. Women were expected to marry and bear children, their status tied to family alliances. Still, their agency challenges stereotypes of medieval women, hinting at a society where strength was valued regardless of gender. Viking daily life was a balance of toil and celebration, where the harsh environment forged resilient people. Summers were for farming and fishing, winters for crafting and storytelling by the fire. Feasts marked solstices, with mead flowing and skalds reciting epics. Trade brought luxuries like silk from Byzantium and silver from the Abbasids, enriching their world. But this life was precarious. Famines, diseases, and feuds could shatter peace. Their resilience, born from this hardship, fueled their expansions, turning farmers into explorers. As the age progressed, Vikings evolved from raiders to settlers, their society adapting to new lands. In England, they established the Danelaw, blending Norse and Anglo-Saxon customs. In Normandy, they became Normans, conquering England in 1066. This fusion created hybrid cultures where Norse gods mingled with Christian saints. But as Christianity spread, the old ways faded, marking the age's end. The Viking society's richness lies in its contradictions, a people both brutal and poetic, egalitarian and hierarchical, pagan and eventually Christian. It invites us to ponder how such a culture produced explorers who reached America 500 years before Columbus, or artists whose intricate jewelry still dazzles today. And as we delve deeper, we uncover the human stories behind the legends, tales of love, loss, and longing that make the Vikings not just warriors, but people like us, striving against the odds. Viking society, with its blend of culture, religion, and daily resilience, forms the backbone of their legendary age, a foundation that supported their conquests and explorations. It is a world where the role of women as managers, traders, and even warriors challenges our perceptions, and where the gods walked among men, guiding their fates. This intricate web of life not only sustained the Vikings, but propelled them to greatness, leaving a legacy that endures in our languages, laws, and lore. Famous Viking leaders and legends. The Viking Age was not just defined by its raids and explorations, but by the larger than life figures who led them, men whose deeds blurred the line between history and legend, their names echoing through time like the crash of waves against a longship's hull. These leaders were warriors, explorers, and kings, each one a product of their society's fierce independence and unyielding ambition, driven by a code of honor that prized bravery above all else. Their stories, preserved in sagas recited around flickering hearths, have inspired generations, but they also leave us with tantalizing questions. Were these men real, or embellished heroes crafted to embody the Viking spirit? How did their personal quests shape the fate of nations? And what hidden truths lie beneath the layers of myth that surround them? As we delve into the lives of three of the most famous Viking leaders, Ragnar Lothbrok, Leif Erikson, and Harald Hardrada, we uncover a world where fact and fiction it's intertwine, creating legends that continue to captivate and confound. Ragnar Lothbrok emerges from the mists of legend as one of the Viking Age's most enigmatic figures, a man whose name alone struck terror into the hearts of Europeans. Born in the 9th century, Ragnar is said to have been a Danish king and raider, though his existence is debated. Some historians believe he was a composite of several warriors, while others point to mentions in the Anglo Saxon Chronicle as evidence of his reality. According to the sagas, Ragnar was a fearless leader who began his career as a young man slaying a monstrous serpent to win the hand of the shield maiden Lagertha, a warrior woman as fierce as any man. Their marriage produced legendary sons, Ivar the Boneless, Björn Ironside, and Sigurd Snake in the Eye, who would carry on his legacy of conquest. Ragnar's raids took him far and wide, from the coasts of England to the rivers of France. In 845 AD, he led a fleet of 120 longships up the Seine to besiege Paris, a daring assault that forced King Charles the Bald to pay a massive ransom of £7 of silver to lift the siege. This victory not only enriched Ragnar, but also demonstrated the Vikings' tactical brilliance, using their shallow draft ships to navigate rivers and strike at the heart of kingdoms. But Ragnar's ambition knew no bounds. He dreamed of conquering England, leading raids that sacked monasteries and terrorized villages. His legend grew with each tale. He was said to be invincible, protected by a shirt enchanted against snake bites, a gift from his second wife, Aslaug, daughter of the Valkyrie Brynhildr. Yet Ragnar's hubris led to his downfall. Captured by King Ella of Northumbria after a failed raid, he was thrown into a pit of venomous snakes, where he died defiantly, chanting a death song that promised vengeance from his sons. True to the saga, Ivar, Bjorn, and their brothers invaded England, capturing Ella and subjecting him to the gruesome Blood Eagle execution. Ragnar's death ignited the Great Heathen Army's invasion in 865 AD, leading to the conquest of much of England. But was Ragnar real, or a mythic figure created to embody Viking ideals? Archaeological evidence is scarce, but his son's historical existence suggests a kernel of truth. The mystery of Ragnar Lothbrok lies in separating fact from legend. Did he really slay a dragon, or was that a metaphor for his conquests? And what other untold exploits might history have forgotten? From the blood-soaked battlefields of England, we turn to the icy horizons of the North Atlantic, where Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, became the first European to set foot on North America. Born around 970 AD in Iceland, Leif grew up in a family of explorers. His father, Eric, exiled from Norway for manslaughter, had discovered and settled Greenland in 986 AD, naming it to attract colonists despite its harsh climate. Leif, raised on tales of adventure, inherited his father's wanderlust. Around 1000 AD, Leif set sail westward, inspired by Bjarni Herjolfsson's sighting of unknown lands. According to the saga of the Greenlanders, Leif first landed in Helluland, Baffin Island, a rocky barren place, then Markland, Labrador, a forested coast rich with timber, finally Vinland, Newfoundland, a land of wild grapes, salmon, and mild winters. Leif built Leifsbudir, a small settlement where his crew wintered, harvesting resources scarce in Greenland. Leif's discovery was groundbreaking, Europeans in America 500 years before Columbus. But why didn't they stay? Hostile encounters with Skraelings, natives, played a role, as did the distance from Greenland. Leif returned home, spreading tales of Vinland, but no large settlement followed. His brother Thorvald explored further, but was killed by an arrow. Sister Freydis led a disastrous expedition marred by murder and betrayal. These failures doomed Vinland, but the saga's details, grapes, self sown wheat, hint at a real place. Archaeology confirms the legend. In 1960, at Lonso Meadows in Newfoundland, Helge Ingstad found Viking ruins, longhouses, iron nails, a soapstone spindle dated to 1000 AD. It's the only confirmed Viking site in North America, proving Leif's voyage. But mysteries remain. What happened to the settlers? Did they intermarry with natives? And how far did they explore? Artifacts like butternuts, not native to Newfoundland, suggest they ventured south. Life's story is one of discovery cut short, a whisper of what might have been if the Vikings had pressed on. From the frozen north, we sail to the stormy seas of Norway, where Harald Hardrada, the last great Viking king, embodied the age's fading glory. Born in 1015, Harald was a giant of a man, over 6 feet tall, with a reputation for ferocity. At 15, he fought at Stiklestad, where his half-brother Olaf II died. Exiled, Harald joined the Varangian Guard in Byzantium, the elite bodyguard of the emperor. In Constantinople, Harald rose quickly, leading daring raids and amassing wealth. Legends tell of him escaping prison by having his men lift his boat over the city walls. He returned to Norway in 1046 with a fortune, claiming the throne. As king, Harald unified Norway through brutal campaigns, earning the nickname Hardrada, hard ruler. His reign was marked by constant war, culminating in 1066 when he invaded England to claim the throne. The Battle of Stamford Bridge was Harold's last stand. Facing Harold Godwinson's English army, Harold's forces were caught off guard while resting without armor. A lone berserker held the bridge against the English, killing 40 before falling. Harold fought valiantly, but was struck by an arrow in the throat, dying as the sun set on the Viking Age. Weeks later, at Hastings, William the Conqueror, himself of Viking descent, took England. Harold's death marked the end of Viking expansion, but his legacy endures, a king who lived by the sword and died by it. What if he had won at Stamford Bridge? Would England be Norwegian? Harold's story is one of ambition's cost, a reminder that glory often comes with a price. These leaders, Ragnar the Raider, Leif the Explorer, Harold the Conqueror, embody the Viking spirit, their lives a blend of fact and fiction that continues to captivate. But as we delve deeper, we uncover the human stories behind the legends, tales of love, loss, and longing that make the Vikings not just warriors, but people like us, striving against the odds. Viking society, with its blend of culture, religion, and daily resilience, forms the backbone of their legendary age, a foundation that supported their conquests and explorations. It is a world where the role of women as managers, traders, and even warriors challenges our perceptions, and where the gods walked among men, guiding their fates. This intricate web of life not only sustained the Vikings, but propelled them to greatness, leaving a legacy that endures in our languages, laws, and lore. The height of power. The Viking Age reached its zenith in the 9th and 10th centuries, when the Norsemen's longships carried them not just to raid, but to conquer and settle vast swaths of Europe, reshaping the continent's political and cultural landscape in ways that echo to this day. This era of expansion was driven by a perfect storm of factors: overpopulation in Scandinavia, pushing young men to seek land and fortune abroad, advances in shipbuilding, allowing longer voyages, and the political weaknesses of their targets, providing ripe opportunities for invasion. The Vikings' conquests in England, France, and their influence in Russia stand as testaments to their adaptability, ferocity, and enduring impact, but they also raise intriguing questions about how a people from the fringes of Europe came to dominate so much of it, and what secrets of their strategies and societies remain buried in the annals of history. The Vikings' forays into England began as hit and run raids, but quickly evolved into full scale invasions that would forever alter the island's destiny. After the initial shock of the Lindisfarne raid in 793 AD, the Norsemen returned in greater numbers, targeting monasteries and coastal towns for their wealth and vulnerability. By the mid 9th century, the raids had escalated into a concerted effort to conquer. In 865 AD, a massive fleet known as the Great Heathen Army, led by the brothers Ivar the Boneless, Ubbe, and Halfdan, sons of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, landed on the shores of East Anglia. This was no mere plundering expedition. It was an invasion force intent on settlement and domination. The great army swept through England like a storm, conquering Northumbria in 866 AD and establishing a puppet king in East Anglia. They turned their sights on Mercia and Wessex, the last strongholds of Anglo-Saxon resistance. The Vikings' tactics were brutal and effective. They used their mobility to strike quickly, often wintering in fortified camps to launch spring offensives. In 878 AD, they nearly overran Wessex, but King Alfred the Great rallied his forces and defeated them at the Battle of Edington. The Treaty of Wedmore that followed divided England into the Danelaw in the north and east, where Viking laws and customs held sway, and Alfred's kingdom in the south. This partition marked a turning point, but it also raised questions about the Vikings' long-term intentions. Were they content with half a kingdom, or was this merely a pause in their conquest? The Danelaw became a melting pot of Norse and Anglo-Saxon cultures, where Viking settlers intermarried with locals, adopted Christianity, and left their mark on the English language with words like sky, window, and knife. Place names ending in by like Darby or Thorpe like Scunthorpe are Viking legacies, hints of a presence that shaped Britain's identity. But the peace was uneasy. Alfred's descendants, like Athelstan, who became the first king of England in 927 AD, gradually reconquered the Danelaw, blending the two peoples into what would become the English nation. This fusion raises fascinating questions. How did the Vikings, often portrayed as barbaric raiders, integrate so seamlessly into English society? And what lost Viking traditions survived in this cultural melding? Turning westward, the Vikings' conquests in France led to one of the most transformative events in European history, the creation of Normandy. Beginning in the 9th century, Norse raiders, often Danes, sailed up the Seine River to attack Paris and the rich Frankish heartland. Their shallow draft longships allowed them to navigate rivers with ease, striking deep inland where no defenses expected them. In 845 AD, a Viking fleet led by Ragnar Lothbrok besieged Paris, forcing King Charles the Bald to pay a massive ransom of 7,000 pounds of silver to lift the siege. This Danegeld became a pattern, but the Vikings wanted more than tribute. They wanted land. By 911 AD, the Viking leader Rollo had established a stronghold in the Seine Valley. To end the raids, King Charles the Simple offered Rollo land in exchange for protection against other Vikings and conversion to Christianity. This Treaty of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte created the Duchy of Normandy, named after the Northmen. Rollo, baptized as Robert, became the first Duke of Normandy, and his descendants would play pivotal roles in European history. The Normans, as they became known, assimilated French culture, adopting the language and feudal system while retaining Viking vigor. This blending created a unique warrior class that would conquer England in 1066 under William the Conqueror, Rollo's great-great-great-grandson. The Norman conquest transformed England, introducing feudalism, French words, and castles that dot the landscape. But the mystery lies in the transformation. How did Viking raiders evolve into Norman knights in just a few generations? And what Viking customs survived in this new identity? Venturing eastward, the Vikings' influence in Russia was subtler but no less profound through the Varangians, Swedish Vikings who traveled down the rivers of Eastern Europe. Beginning in the 8th century, they established trade routes from the Baltic to the Black Sea, dealing in furs, amber, and slaves with the Byzantine Empire. Known as Rus to the locals, a name perhaps derived from rowers, they founded settlements along the Volga and Dnieper rivers. The Varangians' greatest legacy was the founding of Kievan Rus, the precursor to modern Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. According to the primary chronicle, in 862 AD, Slavic tribes invited the Varangian leader Rurik to rule over them, seeking stability amid chaos. Rurik established his capital at Novgorod, and his successors, like Oleg, moved south to Kiev in 882 AD, creating a powerful state that blended Norse and Slavic cultures. The Varangians served as the elite Varangian guard for the Byzantine emperors, their loyalty and battle prowess legendary. They brought Scandinavian names, laws, and shipbuilding to the region, influencing the development of Russian statehood. But mysteries abound. How did these seafaring Norsemen adapt to the riverine and forested landscapes of Russia? And what role did they play in the Christianization of Rus under Vladimir the Great in 988 AD? The Varangians' integration was so complete that by the 11th century they had assimilated, their Norse identity fading into Slavic history. These conquests in Europe highlight the Vikings' adaptability. They raided when opportunity arose but settled when land was fertile. In England, they created hybrid kingdoms. In France, they became feudal lords. In Russia, they founded dynasties. But this expansion stretched their resources, sowing seeds of decline. As we explore these conquests, we see a people who changed Europe forever, but at what cost? The Vikings' legacy is one of transformation, but it also raises questions about identity, assimilation, and the price of power. The height of Viking power was a time of cultural exchange, where Norse gods met Christian saints, and Viking longhouses gave way to stone castles. In Normandy, the Vikings learned French and adopted chivalry, their descendants conquering England and Sicily. In Russia, the Varangians brought trade and governance, laying the foundation for the Russian state. In England, the Danelaw introduced Norse laws and customs, influencing English legal traditions. But this fusion was not always peaceful. Conflicts with local populations led to bloodshed and resentment. As the Vikings settled, their raiding lifestyle waned. In Normandy, they became the Normans, their Viking heritage diluted by French culture. In Russia, They Slavicized, their Norse names evolving into Russian ones. In England, they intermarried and converted, blending into the Anglo Saxon fabric. This assimilation raises intriguing questions. Did the Vikings lose their identity, or did they evolve it? And what lost Viking traditions, perhaps in folklore or place names, still linger in these lands? The conquests also brought wealth and innovation. Viking settlers introduced shipbuilding techniques, agricultural methods, and trade networks that enriched their new homes. In Normandy, they bred horses for war, leading to the heavy cavalry that dominated medieval battlefields. In Russia, they opened routes to Byzantium, bringing silk, spices, and ideas. In England, they revitalized towns like York, turning it into a thriving trade center. But the height of power was not without challenges. In England, Alfred the Great's resistance halted Viking advance, forcing treaties and conversions. In France, the Vikings' settlement led to conflicts with the Frankish kings. In Russia, the Varangians faced Slavic rebellions and Byzantine intrigue. These struggles foreshadowed the age's end, but they also highlight the Vikings' resilience, a people who adapted, survived, and left an indelible mark on Europe. The Vikings' conquests in Europe were a turning point, a wave that reshaped the continent's shores. But as we near the end of this chapter, questions remain. How did these raiders become rulers? What cultural exchanges occurred in the shadows of conquest? And what mysteries of their legacy still lie undiscovered in the lands they claimed? The Viking story is one of transformation, a saga that continues to unfold as we peel back the layers of history. Conflicts with Christianity. The Viking Age, that era of seafaring warriors and bold explorers, was not just a time of conquest and settlement, but also a period of profound transformation, particularly in the realm of faith, where the old gods of thunder and fate clashed with the rising tide of Christianity, leading to conflicts that would reshape Europe and the Norse world itself. This shift from paganism to Christianity was not a gentle evolution, but a tumultuous process marked by resistance, adaptation, and bloody confrontations as the Vikings encountered a religion that challenged their very way of life. The Norsemen's beliefs were rooted in a pantheon of gods who embodied the forces of nature and human destiny. Odin, the one-eyed wanderer who hung from Yggdrasil to gain wisdom. Thor, the hammer-wielding protector against giants. And Freya, the goddess of love and war who chose the slain for her hall. Their religion was one of rituals by sacred groves, sacrifices to ensure good harvests, and a fatalistic view that one's fate was woven by the Norns at birth, unchangeable even by the gods. This pagan worldview sustained the Vikings through their raids and voyages, providing a moral framework where bravery in battle promised Valhalla's eternal feasts, and cowardice led to the cold halls of hell. But as they pushed deeper into Christian lands, starting with the sack of Lindisfarne in 793 AD, a monastery whose monks were slaughtered and treasures looted, the Vikings came face to face with a new faith that preached love, forgiveness, and a single, all-powerful God. The contrast was stark: the cross versus the hammer, salvation through faith versus glory through deeds. The early raids targeted monasteries, not just for their wealth, but because they were soft targets, undefended and rich with silver chalices and jeweled crosses. But this violence only hardened Christian resolve against the heathen scourge. The turning point came with the Vikings' shift from raiding to settlement. As they established the Danelaw in England, Normandy in France, and trading posts in Ireland, they began to interact more closely with Christian populations. Intermarriage, trade, and daily life exposed them to Christianity's rituals and teachings. In England, the Viking leader Guthrum's defeat by Alfred the Great at the Battle of Edington in 878 AD led to the Treaty of Wedmore, where Guthrum agreed to convert to Christianity as part of the peace terms. Baptized as Athelstan, Guthrum's conversion was a strategic move, but it also marked the beginning of a broader shift. Alfred, a devout Christian king, saw conversion as a way to civilize the Vikings, offering them land in exchange for peace and baptism. But was Guthrum's faith genuine, or merely a ploy to consolidate power? His reign saw the blending of Norse and Christian customs, with Viking graves showing crosses alongside Thor's hammers, a fusion that raises questions about the sincerity and speed of this religious transformation. This pattern repeated across Europe. In France, the Viking chieftain Rollo's settlement in Normandy in 911 AD came with a condition from King Charles the Simple: conversion to Christianity. Rollo, baptized as Robert, embraced the faith, at least outwardly, and his descendants, the Normans, would become staunch Christians, conquering England in 1066 under William the Conqueror, who was Rollo's great-great-great-grandson. The Normans' zeal led them to the Crusades, where they fought for the cross, a far cry from their pagan Viking roots. But the mystery lies in the process. How did these fierce pagans, who once sacked churches and monasteries, become defenders of the faith? Was it forced conversion, genuine spiritual awakening, or a pragmatic adaptation to new lands? In the East, the Varangians, Viking mercenaries in Byzantium, encountered Orthodox Christianity, a rich tradition of icons and rituals that contrasted with their Norse gods. Many Varangians converted, bringing the faith back to Scandinavia. The most famous was Harald Hardrada, who served in the Varangian Guard before becoming king of Norway. His exposure to Byzantine splendor influenced his rule, but he died a pagan warrior at Stamford Bridge in 1066. This blend of faiths created hybrid cultures, where Thor's hammer amulets were worn alongside Christian crosses, raising questions about the depth of conversion. Did the Vikings truly abandon their gods, or did they syncretize them with Christian saints, Thor becoming Saint Olaf, for instance? The conflicts with Christianity were not just external, but internal. In Scandinavia, kings like Harald Bluetooth of Denmark converted in the 960s to forge alliances with Christian Europe, but this sparked resistance from traditionalists. Bluetooth's gelling stones, massive runestones proclaiming his conversion and unification of Denmark, stand as monuments to this shift. But the transition was bloody, rebellions erupted, and pagan holdouts fought to preserve the old ways. In Norway, Olaf Tryggvason's forced baptisms led to civil war. His death at Svolder in 1000 AD, a martyr's end that accelerated Christianization. Olaf Haraldsson, canonized as Saint as Olaf after his death at Stiklestad in 1030, became Norway's patron saint, his cult blending Norse heroism with Christian piety. In Iceland, the conversion was more peaceful. At the Alting in 1000 AD, the law speaker Thorgir Thorkelson, a pagan priest, meditated under a blanket for a day and night before declaring Christianity the official religion to avoid civil war. Pagans could practice privately, easing the transition. This pragmatic approach raises questions about belief's sincerity. Was conversion political, or did it reflect genuine change? The Viking Christian conflicts culminated in battles like Clontarf in 1014, where Irish King Brian Boru defeated Vikings but died, ending Norse dominance in Ireland. In England, Cyneth the Great, a Christian Viking king, ruled from 1016 to 1035, blending Norse and Anglo Saxon traditions. His empire, England, Denmark, Norway, marked the age's peak, but his death fractured it. These conflicts and conversions transformed the Vikings. By the 11th century, Scandinavia was Christian, the old gods relegated to folklore. But the shift was gradual, with pagan elements lingering in holidays like Yule, now Christmas, and place names like Thor's Day, Thursday. This syncretism raises fascinating questions. How did the Vikings reconcile their warrior ethos with Christianity's peace teachings? And what lost pagan rituals survived in disguise? The conflicts with Christianity were a crucible that forged modern Europe, blending Norse vigor with Christian structure. They invite us to ponder the human capacity for change and the enduring power of belief. The decline, internal strife, and external pressures. The Viking Age, that era of seafaring warriors and bold explorers, reached its zenith in the 10th century when Norse kings ruled over vast territories from the British Isles to the rivers of Russia, their society a vibrant blend of trade, warfare, and cultural exchange that seemed poised to endure forever. But like all great epics, it carried within it the seeds of its own destruction, a gradual unraveling driven by forces both from within and without, as internal strife eroded the foundations of unity. The inexorable spread of Christianity reshaped their spiritual world, and the rise of stronger kingdoms in Europe turned the tide against the once invincible raiders. This decline was not a sudden cataclysm, but a slow erosion, like the waves wearing away a rocky shore, leaving behind questions that still intrigue us today. How did a people so adaptable and resilient fade from dominance? And what hidden factors accelerated their fall? The internal strife that plagued Viking society was a potent force, born from the very qualities that had made them strong, their fierce independence, clan loyalties, and the constant quest for power among chieftains who saw themselves as equals under the gods, but rivals in the mortal realm. In Scandinavia, the heartland of the Vikings, the 10th century saw a surge in civil wars as kings sought to consolidate power over fragmented jarldoms. In Norway, Harald Fairhair's unification in the late 9th century was followed by succession disputes that tore families apart, with sons battling fathers and brothers slaying brothers, in a cycle of vengeance that weakened the nation's core. These conflicts drained resources, as men who could have been raiding abroad were instead fighting at home, their longships rotting in fjords while feuds raged on the hillsides. Denmark faced similar turmoil, with kings like Harald Bluetooth struggling to maintain control over rebellious nobles who chafed under centralized rule. Bluetooth's conversion to Christianity in the 960s was partly a political move to unify his kingdom, but it sparked resistance from pagan holdouts who saw it as a betrayal of their ancestral gods. Riots and uprisings followed, with temples to Odin and Thor burned in retaliation, dividing communities along lines of faith and tradition that had once been united by shared raids and feasts. Sweden, too, was fractured, its clans more focused on eastern trade with the Ruses than on collective strength, leading to a society where local loyalties trumped national unity, making it vulnerable to external threats. This internal division was exacerbated by the economic strains of the age. As the flow of silver from Arab caliphates dwindled and raids became less profitable, forcing Vikings to turn on each other for resources. The sagas are filled with tales of blood feuds, where a single insult could spark generations of violence, draining the lifeblood of communities that needed every able bodied man for survival. These conflicts not only weakened the Vikings militarily, but also sowed seeds of doubt in their pagan beliefs, as failed harvests and lost battles were seen as signs of the gods' disfavor, opening the door for a new faith that promised salvation and unity. The spread of Christianity was perhaps the most transformative force in the Vikings' decline, a slow but inexorable tide that eroded the foundations of their pagan society and reshaped their identity in ways that would mark the end of their era as we know it. Introduced through trade and settlement, Christianity first took root in the Viking colonies, where exposure to Christian kingdoms like England and France made conversion a practical choice for integration and peace. In England, under the Danelaw, Viking settlers intermarried with Anglo-Saxons, adopting Christian customs to secure land and alliances, as seen in the baptism of Guthrum after his defeat by Alfred the Great in 878 AD, a moment that symbolized the beginning of the end for pure paganism among the Norse. In Scandinavia, the conversion was more contested, often imposed by kings seeking political advantages. Olaf Tryggvason of Norway, who ruled from 995 to 1000 AD, was a fervent Christian convert who used force to baptize his subjects, burning pagan temples and executing resistors in brutal displays that echoed the raids of old, but now in the name of a new god. His methods were effective but divisive, leading to rebellions where pagan chieftains rallied against the white Christ, viewing Christianity as a threat to their ancestral ways and the freedom to honor Odin and Thor through blots and sacrifices. Olaf's death at the Battle of Svolder in 1000 AD, where he fought against a coalition of pagan and Christian foes, was seen by some as divine retribution, but his martyrdom only accelerated the Christian cause. In Denmark, Harald Bluetooth's conversion around 965 AD was a strategic move to forge alliances with the Holy Roman Empire, protecting his kingdom from German incursions. But it sparked internal unrest as traditionalists clung to the old gods, leading to civil wars that weakened the nation's cohesion. The gelling stones, massive rune stones erected by Harald, proclaim his unification of Denmark and Norway under Christianity. But they also mark a cultural shift where Norse mythology began to fade into folklore, its gods demoted to demons in Christian tales. Sweden held out longer, with pagan strongholds persisting into the 11th century, but the pressure from Christian neighbors and internal divisions eventually led to conversion under kings like Olaf Skotkonung around 995 AD, who baptized his people but faced uprisings from those who saw the new faith as a betrayal of their heritage. This religious schism divided families and clans as sons turned against fathers and communities splintered, sapping the strength needed for overseas ventures and turning the Vikings' focus inward. The conflicts with Christianity were not just spiritual, but physical, as seen in the battles against leaders like Alfred the Great of Wessex, who in the late 9th century rallied his people against the Viking invaders, with a fervor fueled by his deep Christian faith. Alfred's victory at Edington in 878 AD was not just a military triumph, but an ideological one, as he forced Guthrum to convert, planting the seeds of Christianity in the Danelaw and beginning the process of assimilation that would dilute Viking paganism over generations. Alfred's reforms, including the establishment of burhs, fortified towns, and a navy to counter Viking longships, were inspired by his belief in divine protection, turning the tide against the heathen raiders and marking the beginning of England's unification under Christian kings. In Ireland, the Vikings faced similar resistance from Christian monks and kings who saw the raids as a holy war against pagan invaders, leading to battles like Clontarf in 1014 AD, where High King Brian Boru defeated the Vikings but lost his life, ending Norse dominance but also highlighting the Vikings' gradual conversion, as many settled and adopted Christianity to integrate with local society. These conflicts accelerated the Vikings' transition, but they also sowed seeds of internal strife, as pagan holdouts clashed with Christian converts, dividing clans and weakening the communal bonds that had made their society resilient. The Quito Hua process was often violent, with kings imposing the faith through force, leading to rebellions that drained resources and turned brother against brother. In Norway, for instance, Olaf Haraldsson's zealous campaigns in the early 11th century led to his death at Stiklestad in 1030 AD, but his martyrdom as Saint Olaf cemented Christianity's hold, as miracles attributed to him convinced the populace of the new god's power. The rise of stronger kingdoms in Europe also played a crucial role in the Vikings' decline, as centralized states with standing armies and fortified defenses began to counter the hit-and-run tactics that had made the Norsemen so effective. In England, Alfred the Great's reforms created a network of burhs, walled towns, that could withstand sieges, while his navy challenged Viking dominance at sea. Alfred's grandson, Athelstan, defeated a combined Viking and Scottish force at Brunanburh in 937 AD, solidifying English unity and pushing the Vikings back. In France, the Vikings' settlement in Normandy led to their assimilation, but it also created a new power, the Normans, who turned their ambitions elsewhere, conquering England in 1066 under William the Conqueror, a Viking descendant whose victory at Hastings marked the end of the Viking Age in a poetic twist of fate. In the east, the Varangians in Russia integrated with the Slavs, their society evolving into the Kievan Rus' state, but the Mongol invasions in the 13th century would obliterate much of their legacy. These external pressures, combined with internal divisions and the cultural shifts brought by Christianity, created a perfect storm that eroded the Vikings' way of life. As kings consolidated power, the independent jarls who led raids lost influence, and the economic incentives for raiding diminished as trade routes stabilized and local economies as strengthened. The Vikings' society, once fluid and adaptable, became more settled and structured, losing the nomadic spirit that had fueled their expansions. By the 11th century, the Viking Age was waning, its final flickers seen in failed invasions like Harold Hardrada's defeat at Stamford Bridge in 1066, where the last great Viking king fell, his dream of conquering England shattered. This battle, followed by the Norman conquest at Hastings, marked the end of an era as the Vikings' descendants became the rulers of a new Europe. Their pagan roots, buried beneath Christian soil. The decline of the Viking Age raises profound questions about the nature of change and the forces that drive it. How did Christianity, a religion of peace, conquer the hearts of these warrior people? What role did internal conflicts play in weakening their resolve? And how did the rise of stronger kingdoms seal their fate? These inquiries invite us to explore the delicate balance between tradition and adaptation, and to wonder what might have been if the Vikings had clung to their old gods and ways a little longer. The Viking legacy endures in our DNA, our languages, and our stories. So, a reminder that even in decline, great societies leave echoes that resonate through time. The end and legacy. The Viking Age, that tumultuous period of expansion and transformation, did not end with a single cataclysmic event, but rather faded gradually as the forces that had propelled the Norsemen across the seas began to wane, their once unstoppable momentum slowed by a combination of internal divisions, the inexorable spread of Christianity, and the rising power of organized kingdoms that learned to counter their tactics with increasing effectiveness. By the late 10th century, the Vikings' world was changing rapidly as the decentralized structure of their society, which had allowed for flexible and independent action, now became a liability in the face of more unified and fortified opponents who could muster larger armies and build stronger defenses against the lightning raids that had been the Vikings' hallmark. This decline was marked by a series of setbacks that chipped away at Viking dominance, starting with the consolidation of power in the lands they had once terrorized, where kings like Alfred the Great in England had not only repelled invasions, but also begun the process of unifying their realms under a single banner, creating nations that were better equipped to resist future assaults. Alfred's grandson, Athelstan, defeated a combined force of Vikings, Scots, and Irish at the Battle of Brunanburh in 937 AD, a victory that solidified English unity and pushed the Norse back to their strongholds in the Danelaw, where their influence would gradually diminish through assimilation and cultural blending rather than outright conquest. In France, the Vikings' settlement in Normandy had led to their transformation into the Normans, a hybridized people who adopted French language and customs while retaining their Norse vigor. But this evolution also meant that they turned their ambitions elsewhere, conquering England in 1066 under William the Conqueror, a descendant of the Viking leader Rollo, in a battle that would mark the symbolic end of the Viking Age, as the Norsemen's direct influence waned in favor of their Norman heirs. William's victory at Hastings not only ended the line of Anglo-Saxon kings, but also represented the culmination of Viking expansion in Western Europe, as the Normans, once raiders, became rulers who focused on consolidation rather than further raids, their energies directed toward governing their new kingdoms and participating in the Crusades, where their warrior spirit found a new outlet in the service of Christianity. The Battle of Hastings itself was a dramatic clash that encapsulated the Viking legacy, with Harald Hardrada of Norway, the last great Viking king, meeting his end at Stamford Bridge just weeks earlier, his death signaling the close of an era where Norse warlords could still dream of conquering distant lands with their longships and battle axes. Harold's invasion of England was a bold gamble, driven by a claim to the throne through his predecessor Harold Fairhair's lineage, but his defeat by Harold Godwinson at Stamford Bridge left the English king exhausted, only to face William at Hastings, where the Norman cavalry and archers overwhelmed the Saxon shield wall in a battle that changed the course of English history. The irony is palpable. Vikings, through their Norman descendants, ultimately conquered the land they had raided for centuries, but in doing so, they ceased to be Vikings, their identity absorbed into the feudal tapestry of medieval Europe. This assimilation was accelerated by the spread of Christianity, which had begun to take hold in Scandinavia by the late 10th century. As kings like Olaf Tryggvason in Norway and Harald Bluetooth in Denmark converted to forge alliances with Christian Europe and consolidate power at home. But this shift came at the cost of internal conflicts that drained resources and divided loyalties, leading to civil wars where pagan traditionalists clashed with Christian converts in battles that weakened the societal bonds that had once made the Vikings so formidable. The Quito Hoa process was often violent, with kings imposing the new faith through force, burning pagan temples, and executing resistors. But it also brought benefits like literacy, trade with Christian kingdoms, and a sense of unity under a single god. Yet it eroded the pagan ethos of individual glory and fate that had fueled the raids, replacing it with a more submissive worldview that discouraged the adventurous spirit of old. External pressures also played a crucial role in the Vikings' decline, as the kingdoms they once preyed upon began to organize and fight back with greater coordination, building fortified towns, raising standing armies, and developing naval forces that could challenge the longships on their own terms. In England, Alfred the Great's burhs, networked fortifications, provided safe havens and bases for counterattacks, while his navy patrolled the coasts to intercept raiders before they could land. Similarly, in France, the Carolingian kings fortified their rivers and coasts, making raids less profitable and more risky, leading many Vikings to settle rather than raid, as seen in the establishment of Normandy in 911 AD under Rollo, who agreed to defend the Seine from other Vikings in exchange for land and baptism. In the east, the Varangians' influence in Russia waned as the Kievan Rus' state matured and adopted Orthodox Christianity in 988 AD under Vladimir the Great, who married a Byzantine princess and shifted the cultural focus southward to Constantinople, diminishing the Norse elements in favor of Slavic and Byzantine traditions, leading to the assimilation of the Varangians into the local population. This loss of cultural identity meant that the Vikings' distinctive way of life, raiding, exploring, and trading as free agents, became obsolete in a world of emerging nation-states with professional armies and bureaucratic governments that could outmatch the Vikings' decentralized structure. Internal strife further hastened the decline, as the constant feuds among chieftains and kings in Scandinavia diverted energy from overseas ventures to domestic power struggles, with succession wars and clan rivalries weakening the ability to mount large-scale expeditions. In Norway, for instance, the civil wars of the 12th century between rival claimants to the throne drained the resources that once funded raids, while in Denmark, the focus shifted to consolidating power at home rather than seeking glory abroad. The overextension of Viking settlements also played a role, as colonies in Greenland struggled with climate change during the Little Ice Age, leading to their abandonment by the 15th century. a poignant reminder of the limits of human endurance in the face of environmental shifts. The rise of stronger kingdoms in Europe sealed the Vikings' fate, as centralized states like England under the Plantagenets and France under the Capetians developed feudal systems with knightly orders and standing armies that could repel Viking incursions more effectively, turning the tables on the once feared raiders and forcing them into treaties or defeat. The Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066, where Harold Hardrada's Norwegian army was crushed by Harold Godwinson's English forces, marked a symbolic end to the age of Viking invasions, as the exhausted English then faced the Normans, Viking descendants, at Hastings, where William the Conqueror's victory signaled the integration of Viking blood into the European mainstream, but at the cost of their distinct identity. This decline raises profound questions about the nature of power and change as the Vikings decentralized, merit based society, which had allowed for rapid expansion and adaptability, ultimately proved unable to withstand the pressures of more organized opponents and internal divisions that fractured their unity. The Kitohua process, while bringing stability and alliances, also diluted the warrior ethos that had defined them, replacing the fatalistic acceptance of death in battle with a promise of salvation that discouraged the risk taking raids of old. As pagan festivals gave way to Christian holidays and runic inscriptions faded in favor of Latin script, the Vikings' world transformed, their longships beached, and their sagas relegated to the fireside tales of a bygone era. Yet the Vikings' decline was not a complete erasure, as their legacy endured in the cultures they influenced, from the Norman conquests that shaped medieval Europe to the Varangian foundations of Russian statehood, leaving us to wonder how different the world might be if the Viking Age had lasted longer or ended differently. The internal strife that plagued their homelands, with kings like Harold Hardrada spending their energies on failed conquests abroad while neglecting unity at home, highlights the fragility of power built on personal loyalty rather than institutional strength, a lesson that resonates through history as empires rise and fall on the tides of change. The external pressures from rising kingdoms like the Holy Roman Empire and the Byzantine state also played a pivotal role, as these powers developed diplomatic and military strategies that outmaneuvered the Vikings' hit and run tactics, forcing them into settlements and treaties that gradually eroded their independence. In the British Isles, the unification under kings like Alfred and his descendants created a England that could resist and eventually absorb Viking influence, while in France, the Vikings' transformation into Normans marked the end of their raiding lifestyle as they became part of the feudal order they once disrupted. This interplay of internal strife, religious transformation, and external pressures created a perfect storm that swept away the Viking Age. But it also left behind a rich legacy of exploration, cultural fusion, and innovation that continues to shape our world, from the English language's Norse words to the democratic traditions of the Althing in Iceland. As we ponder this decline, we are left with the thrill of what might have been, a world where Viking longships still sailed the seas, their dragon heads cutting through the waves, carrying the spirit of adventure to new horizons. The Viking Age's end is not just a historical fact, but a mystery of transition, inviting us to explore the delicate balance between tradition and change, and to wonder what lost opportunities lie in the wake of its passing waves.